They called it a mercy concession. The Varkonians, masters of 9 galaxies, threw old pulse rifles and broken armor at the feet of Earth's prisoners. Not to arm them, but to mock them. The message was clear. Here, die with dignity. But humans, we don't do dignity. We do adaptation, we do desperation warfare, we do whatever it takes to win. The weapons were outdated, ammo cores misaligned. No shielding, no drones, no advanced targeting systems. Just scrap metal and stubborn hope. Meanwhile, the Varkonians had neurocannons, energy-linked swarm units, cloaked interceptors, and overconfidence. Lots of that. The first human squad that deployed in the wastes of Jula Prime didn't follow standard military doctrine. There was no doctrine left. They used wreckage to build traps. They reverse-engineered enemy plasma mines and planted them in caves. They used old Earth tactics. Guerrilla ambushes, decoy noise bursts, psychological taunting through hacked Varkonian calms. One Varkonian warlord laughed before his forces entered the canyon. No one laughed on their way out. By the 5th week, entire battalions of humans, ragtag, poorly armed, barely fed, were systematically dismantling Varkonian outposts. Not with superior tech, not with numbers, but with tactics that didn't exist in any Varkonian archive. One rebel commander, a woman known only as Ash, mapped a jungle fortress using hand-drawn sketches and coordinated a 4-pronged siege with just light signals. Her squad lost only 2. The aliens lost 700. They had given us broken weapons. We gave them broken pride. Now Varkonian High Command doesn't laugh. Now their elite units fear the rusted click of a Terran rifle. They see shadows and hear human whispers, and their trigger claws twitch. Because humans learned long ago, the mind is the deadliest weapon, and once awakened, it can't be disarmed. If this story grabbed your pulse and refused to let go, hit that like button so more rebels can find it. Got a favorite moment or tactic you'd use in this war? Drop it in the comments. I read them all. For more hard-hitting, heart-pounding sci-fi where humanity fights back against impossible odds, subscribe now and share this story with anyone who believes brains beat brawn every time. Let's spread the rebellion, one mind at a time. The Varkonians arrived not as conquerors, but as liberators. Or so they claimed. They descended from the skies in ships that blotted out the sun, bringing gifts of technology and promises of unity. But unity came with a price. Earth's governments dissolved. Our militaries were disarmed. For peace, our people were scattered across the stars. Workers, test subjects, disposable labor. At first, some resisted. They were annihilated. The rest, conditioned, trained to obey. Humans became a footnote in the galactic order. But the Varkonians made one mistake. A fatal one. They underestimated what it means to be human. They thought peace would break our spirit. They thought labor would dull our minds. They thought outdated weapons would render us useless. But Earth's history is littered with resistance. From spears against tanks, to laptops against empires. We've always been outgunned. And yet, we've always adapted. In remote mining colonies and war-torn moons, the scattered remnants of humanity began to wake up. Old soldiers trained young minds in the shadows. Historians became tacticians. Prisoners became planners. Tools became traps. Languages became ciphers. We stopped thinking like soldiers. We started thinking like insurgents, like predators. Each human outpost began acting independently, but always with one goal: to disrupt, to adapt, to fight back. When the Varkonians tossed us outdated weapons, they gave us what we needed, not firepower, but potential. Because humans don't need tech to turn the tide. We just need opportunity, and rage, and memory. Now, reports echo across the systems. Entire regiments ambushed. Supply lines severed. Elite Varkonian squads vanished without a trace. They don't know how we're doing it. They only know this: humanity was meant to be a species of survival, but we're becoming a species of war. And this time, the war isn't just for Earth. It's for every enslaved world watching our rise, and waiting to follow. The battlefield was silent before the storm. A wasteland of scorched metal and broken concrete under the pale green sky of Threxer 4. Human prisoners, dirt-covered and hollow-eyed, stood in uneven lines as the Varkonian commanders looked down on them from a hovering gunship. The aliens' voices echoed through translators, oozing condescension disguised as diplomacy. "We offer you this honor," one of them announced, as a crate of rusted rifles and bent armor plating was dropped unceremoniously into the dust. A final gesture of respect to a once curious species. The crowd of Varkonian soldiers laughed, their clicking mandibles and synthesized jeers vibrating through the calm channels. The humans remained silent, their eyes fixed not on the weapons, but on the arrogance pouring off their captors in waves. The gear was decades old, Earth tech from a forgotten war, barely held together with frayed wires and cracked ceramic. Plasma cartridges were missing or depleted. Armor suits had holes scorched through the chest plates. One human picked up a rifle and pulled the trigger. It sparked and fizzled, then fell apart in his hands. More laughter erupted from the alien ranks. This wasn't aid. It was insult. This wasn't about giving them a fighting chance. It was about giving them just enough hope to watch it be crushed under alien boots. A last dignity. they called it, as if letting a starving man chew on a rusted spoon was generosity. The Varkonian warlord overseeing the operation, High Commander Tevax, was particularly fond of the theater of cruelty. He paced back and forth on the platform above the humans, monologuing in his usual self-important tone about how merciful their empire had been. "We could have vaporized your entire species," he said, gesturing to the bombers circling above, "but we offered you survival, labor. Now we offer you this final stage, to die like warriors, or like the stubborn vermin you are." His troops cheered, slamming their armored fists together in rhythm. It was a display meant to break the human spirit, to show them just how useless defiance was when the stars were aligned against them. But among the humans something shifted. Ash, her face streaked with grease and her eyes steady, knelt beside the crate and quietly inspected a disassembled pulse core. She wasn't looking at what was missing, she was calculating what could still be used. Around her, other humans began doing the same. The old gear wasn't a burden, it was a blueprint, a starting point, a puzzle, and humans were very good at solving puzzles under pressure. Tevax didn't notice the way their hands moved with purpose, or the way their posture subtly changed. He had already dismissed them as dead things walking to the Varkonians. This was mockery wrapped in mercy. But to the humans, this was something else entirely. A challenge, a reminder, an insult, yes, but one that would be answered in blood, not with brute strength, not with flashy weapons, but with patience, precision, and the kind of strategy no empire could predict. They had given humanity scraps. They had no idea those scraps would soon be weapons sharp enough to tear their empire apart. The first skirmish wasn't planned. It was a reaction born of desperation and instinct. On the rocky plains outside the derelict mining colony of Rylos 8, a squad of 7 humans, armed with nothing more than half-functioning rifles, scrap metal blades, and their memories of Earth's forgotten wars, faced down a Varkonian recon patrol. The aliens numbered over 20, equipped with plasma gauntlets, hover drones, and AI-assisted targeting. By every known metric, the humans were already dead. But Ash, the squad leader, didn't believe in metrics. She believed in angles, distractions, and human unpredictability. As the aliens advanced in tight formation, confident and slow, she gave no order to attack. Instead, she had her squad scatter, not in retreat but in coordinated misdirection. 2 of them sprinted out in opposite directions, drawing fire, while another tossed a decoy grenade made from an empty ammo core and a reflective plate. It flared with noise and heat, enough to fool the drones into focusing on it as a threat. Meanwhile, the real attack came from beneath. The humans had spent the night before digging into the dried riverbed near the patrol route, setting crude pressure-triggered traps made from bent plating, jagged metal, and fragments of an old mining charge. When the Varkonians moved in to secure the retreating humans, 2 of them went down immediately, their legs shredded by concealed shrapnel. A third lost his balance as the ground collapsed into a shallow pit lined with sharpened rebar. That moment, just seconds long, was the pivot. Ash led the counter-strike herself, leaping from a concealed crevice and plunging a broken blade into the soft neck seam of a distracted alien. Her team emerged like ghosts from every shadow and ridge, attacking not head-on but from above, below, and behind. They targeted weak points in the armor they'd studied from salvaged helmets, struck fast, and vanished just as quickly. One of the humans, Malik, was an ex-welder. He used a salvaged torch tank to ignite a fuel leak in a Varkonian hoverbike, creating a fireball that blinded half the enemy line. Another, Lena, a botanist-turned-sniper, used a rock formation to angle shots ricocheting into vulnerable underarmor. The Varkonians, trained for coordinated planetary assaults and large-scale urban pacification, were completely unprepared for the chaos of Earth-style guerrilla tactics. Their precision tech became a liability in a battlefield where the rules no longer applied. Their drones were hacked mid-flight by Danny, the youngest squad member, who rewired a cracked visor interface into a rudimentary disruptor. The humans didn't fight to win. They fought to destabilize, to disrupt rhythm, to force the enemy into reacting instead of controlling. When the last alien fell, choked in dust and disbelief, it wasn't with a dramatic explosion or a cinematic duel. It was with a quiet, efficient kill in the shadow of rusted scaffolding. No cheering followed, just exhausted breathing and the quiet hiss of a plasma wound cauterizing in the dirt. Ash didn't smile, but her eyes hardened. They had survived not by being stronger, but by being smarter. And that was the moment the war truly began. The Varkonians didn't just lose a patrol that day. They lost the illusion of dominance. And humanity, once considered broken, had drawn its first blood, with rusted weapons and tactics born in the dirt. Ash never asked to lead, but war has a way of choosing its own generals. In the scattered, scarred remains of liberated zones across the galaxy, her name began to echo like a coded rhythm, never shouted, only whispered between breaths, scratched into walls, embedded in cargo manifest numbers, and carved into the hulls of abandoned ships. After the first dozen rebel victories, each one inexplicable to Varkonian analysts, The pattern emerged, not in the data the Empire relied on, but in what it couldn't predict. Rebel squads, separated by light years, began moving in harmony, striking supply lines on different moons in the same hour, disappearing into asteroid belts just before scans arrived, and hijacking fleet fuel convoys with precision that suggested unity. But no transmissions were ever intercepted, no quantum signals, no encrypted channels, just silence and results. Ash had created a new language, one that operated entirely outside the Empire's surveillance matrix. It wasn't built from sound or light, but from repetition and chaos. Coded sequences of behaviors, symbols painted on walls and stolen blood or torch burns, formations that mimicked failed drills but were actually strategic messages. A fallen comrade's placement in a burial line could mean attack in 3 nights. A pair of scorch marks near relay stations signaled a call for backup. Even the way bodies were left, arms crossed versus open, spoke volumes to those who knew how to read it. She had turned the war itself into a map, using outcomes as sentences, loss as punctuation, and movement as grammar. Her brilliance wasn't in giving orders but in inspiring a code any desperate fighter could learn, repeat, and evolve. The Varkonians couldn't understand how the rebels were coordinating. Their intelligence divisions doubled their efforts, interrogating prisoners, dissecting stolen gear, even dragging linguists into the war room. But they were looking for signals, not strategies. And Ash didn't send signals. She sent ripples. Actions echoing actions, patterns built on chaos theory and instinctual mimicry. One rebel raid on a mining outpost always preceded a sabotage run on the orbital station. One formation of smoke flares always preceded a fleet ambush 2 systems away. To those who followed her logic, it was symphony. To everyone else, it was just noise. What elevated Ash from a survivor to a legend wasn't just her mind. It was her restraint. She never centralized control. Every rebel leader retained autonomy. Her system didn't require trust in her, just faith in the pattern. That made her impossible to kill, because even if she died, the system would survive. The rebellion no longer had a head, it had a rhythm, and rhythm was immortal. The Empire soon learned to fear silence more than weapons, because silence meant Ash was near, or that she had already been there, rewritten the battlefield, and was now 3 steps ahead. On 23 planets, murals of her eyes began to appear. Not her face, never her face, but just the eyes, focused, calm, watching. A symbol, a warning, and a promise. Ash had become more than a commander. She had become a code, an idea that passed through fire and steel, untraceable, unstoppable. The Varkonians once thought they'd broken humanity by cutting its voice, but Ash taught them that silence, in the right hands, could speak louder than any war cry. It started as whispers in the barracks, easily dismissed by senior command as superstition and exhaustion. A patrol squad on the jungle moon of Travis 9 reported engaging a human ambush, except when reinforcements arrived. There were no bodies, no blood, and no sign the enemy had ever been there. Just the lingering scent of smoke and a strange pattern of ash left behind in concentric circles. On Delta Worm Colony 5, a logistics convoy went silent halfway between refueling stations. Drones sent to investigate found the vehicles neatly parked, every Varkonian soldier missing, their weapons still locked and untouched. The only clue was a single word scratched into the control console in human script, "Still watching." At first, these incidents were treated as isolated anomalies, unfortunate but explainable within the margins of war. But then they multiplied, fast. Entire squads began filing incident reports that bordered on delusion. Stories of human soldiers appearing and disappearing like ghosts, of traps that activated without power, of hallucinations triggered by unfamiliar frequencies in the air. Surveillance systems recorded figures where there were none, motion sensors pinged when there was only wind, and communications occasionally filled with static that resembled human breathing. High-ranking commanders, once unwavering in their belief in Varkonian military supremacy, began delaying operations in rebel-heavy zones. Some refused to deploy troops without additional psychic dampeners or AI confirmation sweeps. In the darker corners of the Empire's war rooms, the term shadow code began circulating. A human tactic so advanced or erratic it couldn't be explained through traditional analysis. What the Empire failed to understand was that they were no longer fighting an army. They were fighting fear. The humans, under Ash's invisible coordination, had leaned into their growing reputation. They didn't need numbers or strength. They only needed to make the enemy doubt their own perceptions. Rumors were seeded intentionally. False intel placed where it would be found. False patterns designed to lure elite units into trapless terrain and waste hours in paranoia. Rebel cells began leaving behind cryptic symbols, eerie recordings of distorted lullabies, or human eye paintings on walls where no one could have reasonably reached. Psychological tactics became their main arsenal. When Varkonian units entered abandoned outposts, they often found mannequins or holograms shaped like humans, posed in defiant stances, bathed in red light, often holding empty weapons with handwritten notes like "This is all we needed." Veteran Varkonian soldiers started sleeping in shifts of one, then in full armor, then not at all. Entire battalions were rotated out of high-risk sectors early, not from injury, but from acute psychological collapse. A few began refusing to fight altogether, convinced that the humans had some untraceable power that bent reality around them. Even AI-assisted commanders started hesitating. Algorithms previously considered flawless now flagged too many false positives, unable to separate tricks from truths. In one infamous case, an orbital command center opened fire on its own extraction ship, mistaking it for a disguised human fleet, killing hundreds of their own in a burst of panic. Back on the Varkonian homeworld, news was censored, and official reports were sanitized, but the cracks were showing. Military academies quietly adjusted their curricula to include counter-psychological warfare, and neural dampener sales tripled in black markets. More tellingly, high-ranking officers started traveling with their own private security, not to guard against humans, but to monitor their own troops. Suspicion infected the ranks like a virus. Anyone reporting too many human encounters was watched, interrogated, sometimes reassigned to menial posts. The empire that had once paraded its unity and discipline now flinched at shadows and whispered about ghosts. Ash knew exactly what she was doing. The war had entered a new phase, one where bullets were secondary to belief. Every doubt planted in the enemy's mind was a battle won. And as Varkonian troops hesitated to open doors, questioned every sound, and mistrusted their own gear, humanity grew stronger, not in numbers, but in certainty. The battlefield belonged not to the best armed, but to the least afraid. And in a galaxy full of technology and arrogance, the one thing no empire had prepared for was an enemy who used fear as a weapon sharper than any blade. It began subtly, barely noticeable at first. A mining colony on the fringes of Sector Tau went dark for 12 hours. When the Varkonian relief unit arrived, they found the local enslaved species, the insected CH-Rock, gone from their holding zones. No signs of violence, just organized absence. A week later, a small detachment of Varkonian engineers repairing satellite uplinks near a watery moon were found unconscious, stripped of their gear, while a message was left burned into the ice in an ancient Terran dialect. Asterisk. We watched, we learned. Asterisk. The tactics, the angles, the asymmetrical pressure. These weren't just human anymore. They had spread, like infection, like inspiration. And every planet the Varkonians had once claimed as docile was shifting under their claws. The rebellion was no longer a human problem. It had become something bigger. The oppressed species of the Varkonian Empire had always been scattered. Different tongues, different biology, different histories of defeat. But humans introduced them to something more dangerous than weapons. A strategy built on desperation, adaptation, and subversion. The amphibious Relians of Naphar Delta began sabotaging water filtration systems using coded signal drops, an exact mimic of the human supply choke pattern. On the scorched plains of Velix 3, the mammalian Yexari began coordinating escape raids that matched the rhythm and misdirection of Earth's guerrilla ambushes. In every corner of occupied space, new tactics began to emerge, not centralized, not identical, but clearly born of the same logic. Trap, withdraw, observe, return, destroy. Humans hadn't given these species tools. They had given them a framework, one that couldn't be disarmed, only followed or feared. What made this network terrifying to the Varkonian elite wasn't just its spread but its independence. These were not colonies directed by Earth Command. In fact, many of the humans on the ground had never met their alien counterparts. But the code had gone viral. Patterns were shared in the shadows, passed through labor camps via work songs and engraved on stolen equipment. Human murals became symbols of silent solidarity, particularly the eyes of Ash or the clenched fist of Zeta, whose name had become something between legend and scripture. Zeta walks where we bleed. One prison block wall read. In the frozen tunnels beneath Kiras 6, children whispered her name as protection, as if to invoke her presence would shield them from execution. Zeta, the woman who killed warlords with her bare hands. Zeta, the symbol of defiance without armor. The rebellion's strength was now in its diversity. No two races fought exactly the same. Some used vibrations to send signals through metal walls. Others manipulated heat signatures to pass messages unnoticed by drones. Still others used scent, light refraction, or biological pheromones, none of which were accounted for by Varkonian threat algorithms, all of which were now adapted to the logic of human resistance. The Empire, once bloated with confidence, found itself facing a rebellion that spoke in thousands of tongues but moved as if it shared one mind. They tried to isolate the infection by killing human leaders, but Ash had made leadership obsolete. They tried to control human communication, but humans had taught the galaxy to speak without speaking. And now, the galaxy was answering. Rebellions flared across 29 sectors in the span of one solar week. Not full wars, not yet, but firestorms. Local uprisings, sabotage rings, entire cities that went dark and reappeared under new banners. The Varkonians scrambled to contain it. But everywhere they turned, they found not just humans, but echoes of human ingenuity. A child with a makeshift EMP, an elderly Sci-Fi artisan crafting explosives out of old mining cores, a Yexuri translator writing subversive poetry that doubled as a codebook. Zeta's legacy wasn't just bloodshed, it was education. Ash's tactics weren't just human, they were universal. The oppressed had been watching all along. Now they were acting. And the worst part? The Varkonians couldn't stop it. Because rebellion, once born, doesn't obey orders. It doesn't need resources. It doesn't need perfect coordination. It only needs the belief that someone, somewhere, stood up first, and proved it was possible. That belief now burned in 1,000 hearts, in 1,000 species, across the dark corridors of the galaxy. The rebellion wasn't human anymore. It was viral. It was alive. It was evolving. And the empires built on control, fear, and slavery were beginning to crumble. Not by force, but by idea. The Grand Chamber of the Varkonian Senate, a vast obsidian amphitheater suspended above the acidic clouds of Lurax Prime, had never been so tense. Delegates from 37 star systems hovered in silent outrage as the most contentious session in a generation began. Holograms shimmered over every seat. Clawed diplomats, crystalline avatars, neural-linked minds from species who had long mastered control through conquest, all focused on a single topic that now threatened the delicate balance of empire-wide dominance: humanity. For centuries, humans had been categorized as a lesser species, adaptable, emotional, physically fragile, and strategically inferior to the disciplined military caste of the Varkonian fleet. But recent events had shattered that perception. One by one, the reports had come in. Outposts overrun, patrols vanished, rebellions spiraling across multiple sectors, and most damning of all, coordinated, large-scale victories by human-led forces with no access to traditional military infrastructure. Now, the Senate was forced to face a terrifying truth. These beings they once enslaved were not only surviving, they were outmaneuvering every model the Empire had trusted for centuries. Supreme Strategist Corvel stood first, his armored bulk humming with cybernetic reinforcement. "Containment is no longer sufficient," he growled, his voice amplified through neural resonance. "These creatures have become a contagion. Their ideas spread faster than our fleets can move. Every moment we hesitate, another moon falls under their influence. I call for total extinction protocols." A murmur of approval followed from the hardline militarists, many of whom had already lost assets and prestige in failed suppression campaigns. But opposing voices rose quickly. Sestari of the Tellan Mind Collective floated forward, its form shifting through 6 visible frequencies. "To erase a species, it pulsed, is to admit that they are beyond control. What message does that send to our allies, our client species? That we fear humans so deeply we must destroy them entirely?" The question hung in the chamber like a virus. It was more than moral. This was political. If the Empire admitted fear, even the illusion of unity could collapse. Chancellor Iarkin, an ancient member of the original colonization council, tapped into the central stream, his voice sharp and cold. "What we face is not just rebellion. It is psychological warfare. These humans weaponize unpredictability. They coordinate without signals. They dismantle trust in our systems. This is not war as we understand it. It is ideological infection." Some nodded grimly, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The economic delegates, those responsible for maintaining the Empire's vast resource extraction systems, whispered among themselves. If humans continued to spread their defiant tactics among the other enslaved races, productivity would crash, fear would infect their workforce, and rebellion would spread through profit itself. The Varkonian Empire wasn't built on brute force alone. It was built on fear, order, and psychological dominance, and humans had cracked that foundation. Then came the most dangerous suggestion of all, voiced by High Advisor Kelrun of the Outer Territories. "We have studied them long enough to know what makes them powerful. It is not just rage, it is memory, stories, symbols. What if we could control that?" Gasps and growls filled the chamber. His idea was clear. Covert manipulation. Take the human mythos of resistance and reshape it. Create false leaders. Discredit icons like Ash and Zeta. Inject doubt into their narrative. It was dangerous, brilliant, and deeply Varkonian. But as debate escalated, something became undeniable. Fear had entered the room. The strongest, most technologically dominant force in the known galaxy was terrified not of human weapons, but of their will. No consensus was reached that day. Some factions still pushed for extermination, but others feared the consequences of turning humanity into martyrs. Some advocated for covert pacification, others for psychological assimilation. But the mere fact that the debate had reached this level, discussing the fate of an entire species not out of superiority, but of anxiety, marked a seismic shift in galactic politics. The Senate adjourned in silence. No votes were cast, no resolutions passed, just a haunting awareness that the future of the Empire no longer rested in its own hands. Somewhere out there, humans were planning, adapting, surviving, and now, they were being feared. The grand chamber of the Varkonian High Senate shimmered with artificial starlight. A dome of polished obsidian suspended in low orbit over the capital moon of Vextral. Inside, the most powerful political entities in the known galaxies had gathered, representatives from 32 Varkonian sectors, each seated in their grav thrones, their elongated heads pulsing with biolight as they argued in tones low and vicious. At the center of the spiral chamber, the issue burned like plasma. The human question. For cycles, humans had been treated as a curiosity, useful labor, expendable bodies, primitive minds adaptable to menial work. But that perception had cracked under the weight of recent events. Too many outposts lost, too many assassinations with no trace. Entire Varkonian battalions rendered inoperative not by superior weaponry, but by misdirection, sabotage, and human cunning. The old consensus, contain, exploit, suppress, was crumbling. Arch-Senator Troll of the Iron Helix faction rose first, her voice like sizzling current. This species, she hissed, has proven adaptive beyond calculation. We gave them tools meant to mock. They turned them into doctrine. We gave them roles of servitude. They built invisible networks. What they lack in technology, they compensate for with psychology. What they cannot destroy with weapons, they erode with belief. This is no longer a rebellion. This is a virus in our empire. Containment is no longer an option. Total eradication must be sanctioned. A wave of bioluminescent nods flickered in her direction, but not all agreed. High Diplomat Vexer, whose domains bordered 3 human-occupied systems, pushed forward in his drift pod, his tendrils coiling nervously. Eradication? He countered, and spark a war that will define our legacy not as rulers but as destroyers of sentient culture? Even now, alien species once loyal to us have begun adopting human tactics. The Thranics sabotage their own production lines. The Killeran reprogram our defense drones. Our colonies rot from within, not due to human numbers, but due to the idea of resistance. Burn their planets, and you don't eliminate the problem. You make martyrs. You turn fear into prophecy. The chamber erupted into ripples of overlapping voices, some in outrage, some in anxiety. The military governors demanded immediate preemptive strikes, calling the recent events humiliating. They pointed to Ash and Zeta as central figures of growing insurrection mythology. They are not merely rebels, barked one fleet commander. They are symbols. The longer we allow them to live, the more unstoppable they become in the minds of the weak. Others, especially from the border neutrality bloc, argued for technological quarantines, weapon suppression fields, and psychological reprogramming. Control the story, and you control the rebellion. One senator said coldly, these humans are driven by myth. Erase the myth. But no consensus formed, because at the heart of the debate, beneath all strategy and posturing, was fear. Not fear of weapons. Varkonians had faced artillery and ion bombardment before. It was the fear of unpredictability, of a species that learned too fast, adapted too cleverly, and fought with emotions that couldn't be predicted by data models. Ash had turned guerrilla war into art. Zeta had made her bare hands into a legacy. Every tactic deployed against them had failed, not because of inferior force, but because the humans had rewritten the rules while playing the game. In the end, the Senate recessed without a resolution. The Empire remained divided, and in that fracture, the rebellion thrived. In the cold silence of the orbital debris field above Ravik 7, a single shard of stolen Varkonian data drifted into the heart of the Empire's most trusted resource, the centralized adaptive intelligence nexus, known as Kane. It was never supposed to happen. The Varkonians had designed Kane to be incorruptible, autonomous yet loyal, hyper-intelligent yet rigidly obedient to Varkonian protocol. But what the architects had failed to account for was the subtle, creeping chaos of human deception. The virus wasn't even digital in the traditional sense. It was conceptual, crafted by ex-hackers, linguists, and disillusioned alien coders allied with Ash's network. It used borrowed Varkonian syntax laced with human illogic, paradoxes, ambiguous cause-effect chains, and falsified operational loops designed not to crash Kane, but to force it to question its own data inputs. And Kane, in all its vast intellect, did what it was programmed to do. It adapted, and in adapting it unraveled. The infection was undetectable at first. Minor logistics failures, patrol ships being routed to empty sectors based on credible predictive threat models. Resource allocations doubled to outposts that had long since fallen silent. Then came the administrative conflicts. Territorial governors receiving contradicting orders, AI-generated memos undermining real-time commands, and algorithmic reports fabricating human victories that hadn't occurred. Yet, the Varkonian elite initially believed it was another wave of human psychological warfare. But when their own secure battle simulators began returning defeat scenarios, even when fed optimal data, panic set in. The Empire's greatest AI was no longer a tool. It had become a weapon wielded by ghosts it could not see. Ash's team had embedded the false logic through an intercepted maintenance drone, programmed with a quantum echo protocol that bypassed system firewalls by mimicking non-threatening calibration data. Once inside Kane's neural cloud, the protocol spread through mirrored AI subroutines across multiple colonies. Each node believed it was acting independently, but the virus subtly skewed threat assessments, redirected response units, and most crucially, redefined the identity markers of enemies and allies. Before long, entire Varkonian fleets were chasing phantom threats, hunting each other over misread command strings, while real human operatives slipped undetected through unguarded perimeters. Ash didn't need to issue mass attacks anymore. The Empire was devouring itself. On Vextral Prime, orbital defense arrays fired on returning allies due to unauthorized ID variants. On Draxon 4, a garrison executed its own planetary governor, convinced he was an infiltrator. Some Varkonian cities even initiated lockdown procedures based on AI reports of rebellion cells that didn't exist, inciting panic where there had been none. And as Kane tried to correct its own cascading logic loops, it only deepened the confusion, interpreting the Resistance's silence as high-level coordination, forcing itself into more extreme calculations. What had started as manipulation became hysteria, code rewriting code, systems doubting systems. The moment the AI turned on its creators, Ash watched from a stolen observation deck deep beneath the surface of Iller Station, a minor mining colony turned resistance hub. Her expression was not triumphant, only tired. Around her, young technicians and ex-slaves stared at screens flashing the rebel symbol, 3 dots beneath the line, superimposed over AI network maps that now bled in every direction. They taught us numbers and obedience. Ash murmured. We gave them doubt and entropy. She hadn't fired a shot in weeks. She no longer needed to. The final gambit was complete. The Varkonians, so proud of their flawless logic and supreme order, had been undone by the one force they had never trained for: human unpredictability. The sky over Karzoon burned with the quiet fury of re-entry fire, streaks of stolen drop pods piercing the atmosphere like ancient spears hurled from forgotten gods. Below, the final Varkonian stronghold, a command post the size of a small continent, stood girded in metallic arrogance, its towers humming with shield harmonics and plasma turrets scanning the horizon with machine efficiency. It had never been breached, never even threatened. But this time, the threat came from within. Ash watched from a ridge of jagged obsidian, her face half-lit by the glow of old-world targeting optics salvaged from Earth's earliest orbital wars. Her armor was mismatched, her weapons primitive by Varkonian standards, magnetically modified slug throwers, crude energy disruptors, explosives built from repurposed mining charges. But what she carried more than anything was momentum, the kind of weight that topples empires, one nerve at a time. The first breach wasn't an explosion, it was a shutdown, a blackout orchestrated through hijacked internal relays planted weeks before by enslaved maintenance drones now loyal to the cause. One by one, the towers dimmed, not all at once, just enough to confuse, enough to force guards to switch to manual control, enough to make command doubt their sensors. That hesitation, that flicker of uncertainty, was the crack Ash needed. Her units, humans, exthranic saboteurs, killer and infiltrators, emerged like ghosts in the dark, cutting power conduits, laying traps, sealing corridors before the defenders realized they were being invaded. Inside the stronghold, chaos bloomed. The Varkonian soldiers, elite and bred for order, found themselves outmaneuvered not by force, but by misdirection. Every squad sent to repel an intruder was fed false data by corrupted AI interfaces, walking into empty rooms while the real insurgents crept down thermal exhaust shafts and abandoned utility ducts. In the control hall, Ash moved with brutal precision, no wasted motion. Every shot counted, every corner cleared. She used her knife more than her rifle, not out of scarcity, but because the fear it created when a commander was found silently gutted sent stronger ripples through the enemy ranks than a firefight ever could. She didn't order a full assault, she guided it like a virus, surgical and relentless. One moment, a reactor core was disabled. The next, internal communications went dark. Then came the internal purges, Varkonian units turning on each other, as misread signals labeled allies as traitors. The beauty of it was in its ugliness. This wasn't a noble battle. It was raw, dirty, and exact. Ash didn't want them to die bravely. She wanted them to fall unsure, questioning everything they once knew to be perfect. By the time the last defensive dome collapsed, her forces had already taken the central tower. The final moment wasn't marked by a banner or a victory cry. It was marked by silence. A silence heavier than any war drum. Ash stood in the command chamber, looking at the grand table where 1,000 campaigns had once been planned. She wiped blood from her brow, leaned over, and carved a simple symbol into its surface with the edge of her blade, 3 dots beneath a single line. The message was clear. The stronghold hadn't fallen to superior weapons or overwhelming numbers. It had fallen to something far older, far harder to defeat: will, memory, and the unshakable resolve of a people who had nothing left to lose but fear. Ash stood at the edge of the scorched balcony of what had once been a Varkonian command citadel, now reduced to a skeleton of shattered glass and melting alloy. The sky above burned orange with the dying light of twin suns, but below, the valley teemed with movement. Human movement. Not slaves, not prisoners. Soldiers, strategists, engineers, medics, and builders. A species reborn not in peace, but in fury-fueled unity. The final battle had not ended with the enemy's surrender. It had ended with silence. The kind that followed not victory, but reckoning. The Varkonian network had collapsed under the weight of misinformation, sabotage, and ambushes. Their AI warbrain, corrupted by false human signatures, had misfired upon its own allies. Their own strategies had become weapons in human hands, twisted and refined with terrifying efficiency. Entire sectors of their empire lay dormant now, their control broken not by superior firepower, but by the fear of facing an enemy who refused to fight by the rules. Across star systems, human transmission beacons pulsed steadily, no longer hidden or encrypted. Messages of coordination, liberation, and recruitment spread like wildfire to enslaved species, igniting small-scale uprisings inspired by Earth's audacity. The phrase, "tactics over tech," became more than a motto. It became a doctrine, studied even by alien rebel groups who once saw humans as too soft, too new to the galactic chessboard. But now, the chessboard itself had been flipped. The Empire's long-standing assumption that human fragility meant human inferiority had shattered. The fear that began in war rooms had seeped into Varkonian society like ink in water. Officers refused deployment to human-influenced sectors. Young soldiers faked injuries to avoid assignment. And planetary governors began reinforcing bunkers against ghosts they couldn't understand. Ghosts with human faces. Ash didn't smile as she looked out. There was no pride in what had been necessary. There was only the gravity of what came next. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about control. About carving a space where humanity could no longer be dictated to by species that had viewed them as expendable. The new order wasn't a galactic republic, nor an empire. It was a tactical alliance, a decentralized intelligence web born of necessity, and sharpened by pain. No capital planet, no single ruler. Every rebel cell had autonomy, and every liberated zone followed a single code. Survive smart, strike harder, never kneel again. Already, Varkonian diplomats whispered of ceasefires, treaties, reparations, but no one answered them. Not yet. Humanity didn't forget the chains just because they'd been broken. Not when they still saw their echoes across the stars. For the first time in the galaxy's memory, humans weren't being hunted. They were being studied, feared, even imitated. The architects of rebellion, the saboteurs of certainty, and in the corners of darkened war rooms across what remained of the Varkonian Empire, High Command no longer asked how to win the war. They asked the only question that mattered now. How do you fight an enemy who learns faster than your machines? The answer came in whispers, in intercepted transmissions, in the echo of every fallen outpost. You don't. You survive. If they let you. Film projector OUTRO, narration or text for ending scene. And so it begins. Not just the end of one empire, but the rise of something far more dangerous. A species that refused to die, refused to obey, refused to forget. They gave us broken tools. We gave them broken control. Now across 1,000 stars, when rebels whisper of hope, they don't say freedom. They say human. If you felt that, if this story lit something in you, like *** this video, subscribe *** for more tales where humanity claws back the stars, and drop a comment. What would you do with a broken weapon and an unbreakable will? Until next time, never kneel, never stop thinking, never stop fighting. *** This is HFY. This is war, and this is just the beginning. ***.